So I am going to get started so we can take as much time as we can on this topic. So I'm excited to be here. My name is Rebecca Gibbs. I am GBS's Population Health Coordinator. I have a master's in nutrition, and meal prep is one of my favorite things on the planet. I love it. I talk about it all the time. Like my friends all know that that's what I do. My husband and I have 2 freezers in our garage because that's how much meal prep food we have sometimes. And it's something that I love to share and help out with however I can. So I'm hoping you guys can learn a lot today. Feel free to pop any questions in the chat or to use the Q&A function. I'll probably get through all the slides and then address questions at the end, just so make sure we have time, but happy to take them. So just throw them in there and then we will get to them. But like I said, this is a two-week series. So we're going to go part 1 today and part 2 next week. So today we're going to lay the foundation of what we're going to do for meal prep. And then next week we'll get into the nitty-gritties of meal prep a little bit more. So this week, really want to talk about food safety in general, how to avoid cross-contamination, keep you healthy, the best processes for freezing, thawing, and reheating foods, and then also how you can keep foods fresh. One of the worst things about being an adult is when you buy a bunch of delicious food and it goes bad before you can use it. And you can help combat that a lot with how you store the food. And then also today, talking about when you're going to the grocery store. Setting a budget, how to shop efficiently, and some staples to have on hand. So when you don't have time to the grocery store, your go-to isn't always going to have to be ordering out. It's something that you can pull a meal together with very quickly. So with that, talking about food safety to start out with, a lot of this seems very simple, but it also something that can be easily forgotten or there's some nuances. So most people know you want to wash your hands and make sure you're working on clean surfaces, including cutting boards, utensils, countertops, pots, pans, etc. And this is going to be kind of the first step and one of the biggest things to keep everything as germ-free, as foodborne illness-free as possible. If you think about all the things you touch throughout the day and all the germs out there, your hands are kind of just gross, right? There's all the dirt, all the gunk, where you set your phone down is going to be covered in germs. Then you grab your phone and use it all the time. So washing your hands thoroughly with warm water for at least 20 seconds of soap is going to be really important. With this, don't forget to wash your wrists, the back of your hands, and underneath your nails, especially if you've got longer nails. That can hold a lot of dirt and germs that you can or can't see. With that, before you're preparing your food, after you handle raw meat, if you use the bathroom, again, touch your phone. If you leave the kitchen, I like to wash my hands, at least a quick little soap and water rinse off anytime I'm going from one type of food to the other. So even if I'm going from different vegetables to fruits, anything like that, I like to at least do a quick wash off. For me personally, when I'm handling raw meat, I also wear gloves. I would do gloves and I wash my hands. I don't like the texture of raw meat. It just is a tactile thing that weirds me out. But that's something that I'll always try to do as well. It's just anytime I can prevent that germs transfer from my hands to something else, I'll wash my hands more than I probably need even. The other with this is talking about, I mentioned the cutting boards, utensils, and surfaces. I like to rinse off things even if they're clean. With that, I am a little bit of a germaphobe when it comes to food, but I want to make sure that whatever is going around my house is not going to get my stuff dirty. So we live by some grassy fields and we have a lot of mice in our house. So I always think of what if the mouse in my house ran across this when I didn't know it. So I won't always thoroughly clean and sanitize things if they're looking clean. If I'm not seeing any signs of our resident mice that we try to catch, but I will at least do a quick rinse off with warm water. If I have any questions about it, I'll do a little bit of soap. And that's what I want to do before I use it, just to be safe. If I have a pot that's been sitting on a shelf for a while or something like that, a utensil that's been in a drawer clinking around with different things, just a quick little rinse off can help keep the germs off of there. And even if you don't have like the mice like I do, I think of how quickly dust gathers on things. And that's something that I want to just rinse off any layer of dust that I can't see yet, just to make sure I'm not getting that in my food. With this, another factor of kind of washing your hands and surfaces, that can be your food surfaces as well. So produce is something a lot of people know, most people know that you want to wash as you get from the grocery store. I always think about who sneezed on that. who grabbed it and picked it up and put it down. I will look at foods. I'm very picky when I go to the grocery store. I try to pick happy foods that look healthy. And if I pick something up and go, ooh, this doesn't look happy, I'm putting it back down and picking up a different bundle of lettuce or different piece of fruit or something like that. So if I don't know who's touched it, I'm gonna wash it. I'm gonna clean it off. And then same with like canned goods. Who knows where they're sitting on the shelf in transport, things like that. Rinsing off the tops, making sure that as you're opening that can, nothing funky gets in your food. It can be helpful as well. And then finally, the aspect of this that I think often gets ignored is your towels and sponges. This is something that I've had to retrain my husband on over and over again. We've almost been married 5 years, and I'm still retraining and catching him. Is that I personally don't use sponges. I think they just collect germs. They get left in the bottom of the sink. I don't like them. But I use dish scrub brushes that I can put in my dishwasher to clean at least once a week. And then towels. If my towel is damp still, if it's, one meal, I'm great. But I try to do a new kitchen towel every day. Same with my washcloths. I try to recycle those and wash them after I've used them for a day. And then if you accidentally touch your face or something like that with the towel, that should go in the dirty pile. Again, it's just reducing the spread of germs. And with this all plays into the cross-contamination and how to avoid that. Cross-contamination is something that happens when harmful bacteria from, usually we hear about this with raw meats and poultry, seafood, things like that, spreads from the chicken or whatever to cutting boards, knives, countertops, things like that. So this can also happen with people with allergies. And sensitivities to food. So if you have celiac disease and can't have gluten, and somebody's been cutting something that is a gluten-containing product with a knife, and then they switch over to the non-gluten items, that can contaminate it with gluten. And that's something that we want to avoid or do. Same thing with nuts. If somebody's been using a knife to cut up peanuts, you don't want to then go use it to cut up something that needs to be nut-free. So with this, you want to make sure you're separating the raw and cooked foods completely. So I like to have separate cutting boards, separate knives, everything like that. So I have my meat cutting board and my veggie cutting board. If I wash them and kind of sanitize them down, I'm fine swapping around at a later date. But I do have some cutting boards that I do try to keep exclusively for meat, and that I use different colors to help me keep track of what's what when I'm doing that. So there's a lot of kind of standards out there of what people do in restaurants, but I just know that my orange cutting board is my meat one. My white cutting board is my veggie one because I can see when it's clean better, and things like that. That's just something that I like to do. Making sure you then, again, wash and sanitize your surfaces thoroughly after they've been in contact with raw meats and foods, just to keep the germs from spreading. Then making sure I like to have either a trash bowl, so it's my junk bowl that I have just like a mixing bowl that I'll often put like a grocery bag or something like that into, that I can put all my random garbage, food scraps, whatever I'm getting rid of into, so that I don't have to try to open up my garbage can or open up a cupboard to get into my garbage can to throw something away. If I've got something that's dripping with chicken juice, I don't want to go, okay, let me walk across my kitchen to my garbage, open the cupboard, shove it inside, and I'm getting chicken everywhere. So I'll do that, and then I will throw away whatever's in that bowl, wash that down when I'm done. So it's less back and forth. It saves me a little bit of time too. And then finally with this, we want to keep the raw foods away from the cooked foods. So if you have your meat marinating on a plate or seasoning on a plate, you cook it, you don't want to then put that cooked food back on the plate that had the raw food on it. Get clean plates, clean utensils. When you're storing raw meats, if you're doing it like an overnight marinade or marinade for a few hours and putting them in the fridge, make sure they're in a sealed container, and you want to put them on the bottom shelf of your fridge so that it's not dripping down into anything else if it drips. And then if you're using that marinade liquid later as part of a meal, you want to make sure you've cooked it thoroughly. Ideally, you want to have it to be 165 degrees, or I like to say boil it for 5 to 10 minutes, and you'll probably be good with that. Next with food safety, talking about freezing, thawing, and reheating foods. With that, we want to make sure that we are taking the time to do this properly, to keep things safe and avoid the germs, avoid the bacteria growth, things like that. So with this, when you're freezing foods, you want to use them within 3 to 6 months after freezing for the best quality. I like to say a year is about the max amount of time that you want to have something in your freezer. Ideally, you're rotating foods more often than that. But I know when things have been in my freezer about a year is when they start to get freezer burned, the flavor's going away. It's something that I don't enjoy as much. So with this, as you're going to freeze foods, try to do it in shallow, airtight containers. Again, avoiding air is going to avoid freezer burn as much as possible. If I'm not putting something in a container like a breakfast sandwich or a burrito, some things like that, I'll wrap it in either wax paper, foil, plastic, or parchment paper. My favorite is parchment paper and then foil is what I'll do on my burritos and my breakfast sandwiches that I meal prep. And that just helps reduce the food waste. I don't have to have as many containers for a lot of things when I'm prepping in bulk, and it helps significantly. I also like the parchment paper because it holds in some of the moisture and it almost helps steam like the breakfast burritos and sandwiches so that I can just microwave them in the parchment paper and take them to go. Because oftentimes I'm not sitting down and eating breakfast in the morning, I'm eating it as I run out the door. With this, you want to make sure that you're also using containers designed for the freezer. They're usually a thicker plastic that's a different composition designed to prevent freezer burn. And also, I know I've been guilty of it multiple times, is I have hit a non-freezer safe container on the edge of a counter that's in plastic and it is shattered, and then I have plastic in my food and that meal is toast. So that's something that I'll always look for and everything. I'm seeing a few people asking about being muted. Everybody is automatically muted. So don't worry about that. And I'll get to the other questions at the end. I'm seeing some great ones come in. So thank you guys. The other thing with this is making sure that you're labeling and rotating that food. So I like to label the food on the bag or the container itself. And then I actually label my freezers as well. I'm a little neurotic on that. I have labels on my freezer on the outside. So I got little magnets that I write down pasta bake, the date I made it, and I put it on the outside of the freezer. Then when we use it, I pull it off and I put it in a pile to clean and reuse. That's what works for me. I've seen people just use a list on a sheet of paper. Find what works for you and do that, but that helps you keep track of what's in there. Or we have one of our freezers is a chest freezer and things get lost in the abyss there. So if I don't have it labeled, I'm going to pull something out and say, what is this mystery meal? And that's something that I don't like to do. The last step to remember with freezing foods is to cool it down completely before you put it in the freezer. If not, it's going to actually raise the temperature in your freezer. It could thaw some of the foods around it a little bit, and it's going to take longer to freeze it evenly. So I always like to refrigerate things overnight before I freeze them. It also helps them freeze a little more quickly because they're already cold from being in the fridge. Part of helping out with this is putting it in smaller portions to help it cool down more quickly. And then I also package it in usable portions. So it's just my husband and I at home. We're not eating a family-sized lasagna. I'm going to eat a slice and he's going to eat a slice. So if we do make a bigger lasagna and I'm freezing the rest for later, I'm going to do 2 slices in a portion in a container because then we don't have to eat lasagna for a week. We can have it one night and move on. And those smaller batches do freeze more quickly. It's nice because we can grab them for lunch if we're doing that instead of dinner, and that can help with that. Want to keep your freezer cold, don't overload it. And the last thing about freezing is I like to freeze fresh foods. So if it's sad and on its way out when you put it in the freezer, it's going to be sad when you reheat it. And that's going to be kind of your freezer 101 of things to do. When you're thawing foods, the best way to do that is in the refrigerator. It's the safest way. It keeps food at a consistent temperature, ideally below 40 degrees, and will help prevent the bacteria the most from growing as it's thawing. So the hard thing with this is you have to plan ahead. It can take at a minimum several hours or even a day or overnight. So you have to plan a little bit in advance for this. As I'm doing that, I try to put it in a container, make sure it's covered, have something underneath it so that either the condensation doesn't make a puddle in my fridge, or if there's a hole I didn't realize in a bag, I don't come out to a puddle in my fridge either. And that's something just, again, prevent the juices, prevent any raw ingredients from dripping down onto other things. If you don't have time to thaw your foods in the fridge, there's 2 other methods. So first you can use cold water. So you basically, with this, you submerge the food in a sealed plastic bag in cold water, and then you want to change the water every 30 minutes to keep it at a safe temperature. With this, you need to cook the food immediately after it's thawed to make sure we're not going to have any bacteria growing. It's not something that you want to do and then use the next day if you can avoid it. Same thing with thawing foods in the microwave. It's food you want to cook immediately after thawing it. So with this, every microwave is different. Look for your defrosting instructions of what they tell you to do. And then if you can't find your instruction manual or you've lost it years ago, Google it and see what your specific microwave will do. Every microwave has a different setting. It does it differently. If it says to pause, separate your food and rotate it, listen to it because that's how it's designed to work. The hard thing with the microwave is it's probably the fastest method, but it will thaw things unevenly. So stirring it, moving it around is definitely encouraged. And also you might have some of the outside edges of that food start to cook if it's a raw thing that you're thawing. So be aware that you may have some unevenly cooked things. So I know I thawed bacon in my microwave once. The edges were started to cook, the insides were still frozen. So I found if I do quickly thaw it in the microwave, I cut the slices in half and I spread them out a little bit better to help prevent that. With reheating and cooking foods, one of the big things you want to remember is if you've thawed a food, you don't want to refreeze it unless it's changed from raw to cooked. So if I've thawed raw chicken, meal prepped, made like a crock pot meal, I need to cook that before I put it back in the freezer, just to help prevent any loss of quality and any bacteria from growing. With this, if I open something up and it's has a funky color, an odor, the texture doesn't look right, I'm throwing the food away because something happened during the process and it's spoiled. For me, it's not worth the risk to say, oh, I need this meal. I'd rather skip it and do something different for a meal than end up in bed sick with a foodborne illness for a day or two. With this, thawing the foods, avoid your room temperature thawing. Throwing it on the countertop in hot water is just a breeding ground for bacteria. And that's the big ones like Salmonella and E. coli. And those are not, fortunately, I've never had them. I never want to have them. I know people who have, and it's horrific. Not a fun day or two to do. So avoid throwing something on the counter to thaw it. Throw it in the fridge, use the water, use your microwave. As you're reheating foods, make sure you're heating it to safe temperatures. So ideally that's up to 165. And then as you're reheating it, stir it around to avoid the cold spots. I know I've had many a time heating up soup in my microwave and the middle is cold and the outside will burn my tongue off. So stir it around. Also in the microwave, if you make a donut shape out of your food and have a hole in the middle, it will heat more evenly so that the edges and the middle have some room to breathe. And then if something says to let it sit in the microwave for a few minutes, do that so that it will let the kind of heat readjust and work its way through and sit. Also, try not to reheat foods too many times. So only reheat what you need. You don't want to microwave your leftover lasagna 2 or 3 days in a row. Microwave just your one portion you want, eat it, and then do the next portion. And that can help, again, preserve the quality, but also make sure that we're avoiding any bacteria. Another tip with microwaves is to use a lid so that it holds in some of that moisture and doesn't dry it out as much. I also love reheating foods in my oven. I'll throw it on 350 and then I'll try to cover it with foil just to help, again, prevent it from drying out. And it gets things a nice crispy texture. So I like this with pizza, casseroles. If I'm heating up leftover like chicken nuggets or French fries, I want crispy. I don't want them to be sad and soggy like if I were to put them in the microwave. The last method is the stovetop. So I like to use that for soups, stews, sauces, and again, stir it here. Make sure, sometimes doing it low and slow is better than a high heat to get it done quickly. If you're doing it on high heat, make sure you are stirring. So next, talking about keeping food fresh and organizing your fridge and freezer. Big thing with this is don't overload it. Make sure that you've got space for the air to circulate and keep things cold. For your fridge, you want to make sure you've got all your dairy, meats, and leftovers, and then check that fridge temperature with your thermometer every once in a while. They make fridge thermometers to make sure it is as cold as the settings is. We had that when we first moved into our house. Our fridge was turning off randomly, and we didn't realize it because we weren't checking that until we went to grab the milk one day and went, why is this warm? A few hours later, it was cold again, and we realized it was turning on and off and not actually keeping food cold, which is how we found out. We're like, oh, this is why our food is spoiling more quickly. So that's something that can help with that. When you're freezing foods in there, you want to keep your freezer at 0 degrees or colder. And something I like to do to make sure that it is staying cold and not doing something like that is to put a cup of water and freeze it. and then I put a coin on top of it so that if the coin isn't on top of it and it's down anywhere in the ice, I know that something's happened and my freezer hasn't stayed as cold as I need it to be. So that's just a little hack to help you keep track of that. Some foods like to stay at room temperature. So that's gonna be your fruits, vegetables, bread. There's a mix on those of where you want them. But with them, you still want to use them within a reasonable amount of time to prevent the spoiling. And with that, we've got this great flyer. You can see it on the screen. We will have a link to all these flyers at the end so that you can download and see them. And this is going to be kind of your hack of where to store things in the fridge, in the freezer, whether they're on the counter or not. And with all of this, always, you want to make sure you're labeling things, especially leftovers. Check the expiration dates. I think condiments are one of the biggest kind of problems that we see. People use condiments that are expired more often, and that can cause problems. To help with this, I put older items in the front, newer items in the back of my fridge. And then I try to make sure that I'm reducing moisture in any of my produce. So as much as I love washing all my lettuce at once or all my veggies at once, I either have to make sure they're dried thoroughly or that I'm keeping an eye on that because that can grow mold very quickly. And then again, as always, if it doesn't seem right, get rid of it. It's not worth the risk. Talking about the grocery store and setting a budget, biggest thing is making a list and only buying what you need when you go to the store. With that, I always try to check my pantry, fridge, and freezer because I've gotten home so many times and gone, oh my goodness, I didn't realize I already had this. I didn't need to buy it. The other thing that I do to help me with my budget when I'm at the grocery store is I look at the unit price of items. So we've got these price labels on the side. The unit price is highlighted in orange. And that's something where if I'm going to use more yogurt, I'm going to see, wow, I can spend 5 cents per ounce on this bigger container where the smaller container is 12 cents per ounce, which is over double the amount of cost. That being said, only buying in bulk is only good if I'm going to eat 32 ounces of yogurt before it expires, or if that's convenient for me to use. If I know that I grab a yogurt and I eat it after I get to work, it may not be worth the time savings of how much is my time worth to scoop that big tub out into a smaller container that I can grab. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. It depends on your life and how chaotic your week is, so to say. In bulk, sometimes if you have family or friends that you can split something with, that can be a great way to save money and use food without it hitting its expiration date before you've used it up. You can also shop seasonal produce. It's usually cheaper and more flavorful. And then using coupons and sales are great, but again, only if it's something you're going to use before it expires. Other things I look for at the grocery store to help me be efficient, use my time, make sure that my money is getting the most bang for its buck is I avoid shopping when I'm hungry because otherwise I'm impulse buying snacks. Sometimes I'll try to remember to bring my own bag. Some stores give a discount. I also use AI for my grocery list sometimes. If I'm like, here's my menu, what do I need? And that takes one step away of what I have to think about and do. When I go to the grocery store, I'm considering my week. I'm saying, do I have time to cut up the carrots if I buy them whole? Or is it worth it to buy them pre-cut so that I don't have to think about it and I don't need to spend my time doing that? It's, again, the cost of convenience, but it's better if you have that pre-cut and you buy it that way as opposed to the carrots sitting in your fridge and not being eaten. Once I get into the store or as I'm making my list, I organize it by different areas of the grocery store. So what aisles, what sections, and that way I can really maximize my time, only go down the aisles I need to. Or some weeks if I'm really busy, I just use a grocery pickup program where I say, here's what I need. They pick it up, I drive up, they load my car, and I leave. And that's one of the, again, it may cost a little bit more, but it saves you so much time, which is a huge commodity. Finally, I want to talk about some healthy staples to have on hand, so we'll have a few minutes for questions at the end. With this, why have these staples on hand? And again, this flyer will be linked, so you'll have this as a resource to see. And this can reduce your grocery shopping trips. If you have it on hand, you don't need to go to the grocery store as often. And it can help you make sure you've got something easy to go that's not going to be, we have nothing in the house, let's just go pick something up. It can help you save money and eat maybe a little bit healthier. A lot of these food staples are affordable, especially if you purchase them in bulk. They have a long shelf life. and can really add up those savings over time. It also helps as you're meal prepping is you don't have to buy as many items or think ahead as much. I'll like to cook a big pot of rice and then use it for meals throughout the week. So we'll have stir fry one day, we'll have it as a normal side, we'll fry it up and do something different. All these different options that I only had to cook one pot for. And a lot of that comes from these staples. I usually do that with my grains for the week. Finally, this also helps you be more flexible in your kitchen of like, okay, do I want rice? Do I want pasta? Do I want quinoa? Which sauces do we want with the pasta? So if you're not as rigid on your meal prep, you've got some options that you can go, okay, I know we're having pasta. I know I've got a couple sauces. Let me pick what sounds good in the day. And then it just makes things simpler. It makes that shopping more easy if you've already got it at home, and it's one less decision you have to make when you're out. You don't have to stare at the wall of rice going, which bag am I gonna buy? So with that, here's a great slide with it'll have all the resources. Some of the resources we'll talk through next week, but this is gonna be your QR code to scan to get all these resources. And then I'm gonna go through, look at the chat and answer any questions. So feel free to pop them either in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll have a couple minutes for questions on that. So let me just scroll and see here. My favorite cutting boards, wood, plastic, marble, etc. So I use mostly plastic cutting boards because I can sanitize them more easily. For me, wood I'll use for non-meat items. Just I feel like I can never get the juices out on that. I love wood cutting boards. I think they're beautiful, but I will use them on my produce and my breads, basically. I just like being able to sanitize and clean things. For me, the marble will dull my knives, I feel like. It's where the ceramic, things like that. I like to keep my knife sharp. A sharp knife is safer than a dull knife. And that's something that I try to just avoid dulling my knives on, because then I have to go get them sharpened because I am not skilled enough to do that myself. Next question was, is it safe to microwave from frozen to cooked in the same plastic container? For that, it depends on the plastic container. So with that, I always look for something that's either designed for the microwave or I personally go to glass, because half the time I either get warped plastic containers, they add some weird taste to it. So I prefer to use glass when I'm reheating things. With that, again, it depends on the container. Some are microwave safe. So just read that. It'll usually say on there whether it is microwave safe or not. The other thing to be aware of with that is some foods will stain the plastic more than others. So a red pasta sauce will typically stain your plastic container if it's one that you want to reuse. I find that throwing food in the microwave loses the original taste of food. Absolutely, it can kill some of those flavors. I think often with that is foods get so easily overcooked in the microwave, and that can kill the flavor, especially on vegetables. I find if the vegetables are overcooked in the microwave, I will not eat them. They're just sad, their color's gone, and I personally don't want to have that flavor in my mouth. So I'll always err on the side of a little bit less cooking time and then add more if I need to. Sometimes I'll even quick thaw something in my microwave till it's not frozen but cold, and then I'll throw it in my oven to finish it off and help either crisp it up or do that and just save some of the time. Let's see what else we have on here. How quickly would you suggest cooking raw meats that you buy at the grocery store? Check the best by date on the meat when you do that. And I always say I'm pretty strict on meats with my sell by dates and best by dates, but I try to do it within a week is my outside always on leftovers, anything like that. Really 2 to 3 days on some things, but it depends on how long they've been sitting on the grocery store shelf with that. Fish and seafood, I tend to cook more quickly. So if we're having salmon for dinner, we're going to eat that at the beginning of the week, closer to when we went to the grocery store. Or chicken, steak, something like that, I may push to later in the week. Milk and dairy products can be disrupted when you're freezing them. So with that, that's something that I try to add my milk and creams afterwards. I try to have a dish that, if I'm doing a soup and it's a cream soup, I'll get everything else ready. And then as I'm reheating it, that's when I'll add the milk and cream. I find that it's hit or miss. Some of my Alfredos heat up really well, some of them don't. Best way to store berries and keep them fresh is I'll often wash them because I will just chaotically eat them out of the fridge I often don't take the time to do that. The biggest thing is making sure that they are dry. There's not extra moisture in there. I've tried the berry containers, I've tried vacuum sealing them, and I haven't found a consistent way that's been my favorite. Berries also don't last very long in my house, so they're usually gone within a day or two. Best recommendation for cleaning fruits and veggies. I rinse them off. I have a little like potato scrub brush that I'll hurry and wash them off with. And then I'll put them on I'll get like even a bath towel. Sometimes it's my kitchen bath towel, and I'll lay them out on there to dry. Um, let's see. Absolutely happy for the flyers. I know people have to hop off. Please do. We're excited to see you next week. We're going to get a lot more into meal prep, but I'll stay on for a few more minutes for other questions. Let's see. I will send a link. You'll get a link to the recording and a link that will let you get access to the QR code that's not a QR code. That will go out tomorrow. Let's see. Berries in a glass jar. That's awesome. Let's see. Sorry, guys. I'm scrolling through lots of great things in here. Thank you, guys. Let's see. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Definitely throw any more in here. If you've got questions. And Summer, I see your hands raised, so give me a second and I will get you unmuted. All right, Summer, go ahead. And Summer, you'll have to click unmute, but you're welcome to unmute and ask your question. Oh, no worries. Thanks, Summer. Thank you, guys. Thanks. We'll hope to see you next week. Part 2, we'll get into all of the nitty-gritties of meal prep. We'll get into my favorite stuff. Seeing a question about milk again. Milk can have a different texture and flavor when you thaw it. It doesn't, something I don't thaw and refreeze because it doesn't thaw very well. If I do use it, I use it for baking or cooking, or I'll go mix it into mashed potatoes. I'll freeze my extra cream sometimes after the holidays. Thanks, guys.